Hello, everyone. My name is Ania Skrzydło. I will be moderating this session. Are there any fans of Highcharts? I hope so, because I have a pleasure to invite to the stage Bryce Chamberlain, Senior Manager at Oliver Wyman Actuarial Consulting, but most importantly, the author of the hcslim package. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Bryce will have a presentation, Easier Highcharting with hcslim. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Great. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. And big thanks to Absalon for hosting this. This is such a cool event. All right. I'm going to share some slides here. And talk about easier Highcharting with hcslim. This is a pet project of mine, which hopefully you'll find useful. I've certainly found it useful myself. But first, I would like to start with a question. Let's see. This is not what I expected. There we go. Wait. I think I need to delete the slides. Okay. There we go. All right. First, I want to start with a question. So when was the last time that you discovered an R package that totally changed the way that you write code? For me, ggplot is an example. I discovered I didn't have to use the base R plotting and I could build these feature-rich charts. And then I discovered dplyr, where I could do my data manipulation in a way that was a little more intuitive and had those nice data verbs that were similar to SQL. It made my code a little bit more readable and easier to think through. And started using the pipe operators, which if you haven't started using that yet, I definitely recommend trying it out. It was very strange to me at first. And then I discovered Plotly, where I wanted some more interactive charts because I was building for the web. And on the web, people want to click around and have little hover tooltips and export their charts. So Plotly was a game changer for me, bringing charts to the web. And the most recent package that I've discovered is Highcharts. I discovered Highcharts when I started the role that I'm currently in 5 years ago at Oliver Wyman. And the team that I joined was using the package, and I had been using Plotly, and I really enjoyed Highcharts. I started using it, and I never looked back at Plotly because it's very feature rich. It's got a really nice API, and if you have not heard of Highcharts before, then this would be very exciting for you. If you have heard of Highcharts before, then I'm going to introduce a new package that I wrote to make it a little bit easier to work with for R Shiny specifically. So what is Highcharts? Does it mean we're all going to eat some gummies and make some charts? Not quite. Highcharts is a JavaScript library. So you might be wondering, why am I talking about JavaScript? And we'll get into R in a minute. But for now, I just want to introduce you to what's running in the background here. This is a very cool project that is run by Highcharts. There's 27,000 Stack Overflow questions related to Highcharts in the JavaScript world. So one of the things I really like about Highcharts is there's a vibrant community. For context, Plotly has 11,000 Stack Overflow questions, and D3 has 38,000. So when I look at these numbers, the story they tell for me is that D3 is something that you can do so much with. Your D3, you're building it from the ground up, kind of from scratch, and then you can build anything that you can dream up. And then on the other side, Plotly is a little bit more simple. You've got probably a lot less features than D3, but it's going to take you a lot less time to make those charts because you've got a nice framework that you're working in. And Highcharts is kind of in the middle. You've got a nice framework, but you also have a lot of different functionality and features that you can do. So I don't know exactly how to interpret these Stack Overflow questions, but I think it's really interesting context. So here is what Highcharts looks like in JavaScript. You've got this Highcharts object, and you call a chart function. You give it the container. So this is the ID of the div where you want to place it in your web application. And then you give it all the options. This is a really simple example. I'm just showing a couple of options. If you go to the Highcharts documentation, you'll see there are just tons and tons and tons of different options. And you can see here, I'm just taking iris and I'm displaying the average lengths here. So super simple chart, simple example, but this you can get really rich with these charts. So let's talk about R. Joshua Kunst wrote this really nice R package called Highcharter, and this is what my company was using when I started working here. And there are 440 Stack Overflow questions for Highcharter. So there's a smaller community, which kind of makes sense because it's R. R is a niche technology, whereas JavaScript is powering the web. And for context, R Plotly has 1.2 thousand Stack Overflow questions. So this is interesting. If you remember on the last slide, Highcharts had almost 3 times as many Stack Overflow questions as Plotly. But we get into the R world, that actually flips. Plotly seems to be more popular, more feature-rich, a larger community, however you want to interpret these numbers. So I think that's kind of interesting. And I kind of wonder if the reason that flips is because of the same issues that I have, and we'll get into exactly what those were. But here's what a Highcharter code looks like. So some of you may be familiar with this. One thing to note about Highcharter is that it works in RStudio, it works in our Markdown, and it works in our Shiny. So it pretty much works anywhere that you're going to use R, which is actually not the case for the packages that I wrote, and we'll get into why and how. But you can see we're using these piped functions instead of that flexible list format that Highcharts was using. So we've got a function here for every different property that the chart might have. This is another simple example. It's also worth noting that Highcharter also has these really neat functions, hchart, and hchart is pre-built with a bunch of different common chart operations that you might run. So you can see here we're having to add this series at the very end. So the hchart is going to save you that work. You just give it data and then it creates the chart. Another thing worth noting is that Highcharter has this aesthetics function that works kind of like ggplot. So if you're familiar with ggplot, you'll probably feel right at home with Highcharter. I personally never found the aesthetics to be, with ggplot to be very intuitive. So I never use the aesthetic function unless I'm using ggplot. But if you use it, then you'll actually really enjoy Highcharter. So I used Highcharter for a while, and it was really the only option that I had for using Highcharts in my RShiny projects. But I started to run into little issues and little problems. And because there wasn't as much forum support as Highcharts, I wasn't able to find solutions to the problems that I was bumping up against. Sometimes I would find the solution in the Highcharts forums, and then I would be able to translate that back into Highcharter code and then apply that fix, which is really nice. But sometimes I would do that translation and it just would break, and I didn't know why. And so I tried to dig into the Highcharter code and found out that there are 18,000 lines of R code, and that's actually the same number of lines of R code as dplyr, which is kind of interesting. So it's a very complicated R package in the background. And when I thought about this, I was thinking it shouldn't be that difficult, right? You're just taking that list of information and then you're just sending it to JavaScript. So what's happening in between, and why is it so complicated? And so I decided to just take a couple hours and just write an R package myself that does what I want it to do and just make that JavaScript translation. So hcslim only has 304 lines of code. It's much, much simpler. Most of those lines of code are actually creating functions to replace those Highcharter functions. So I had used Highcharter in a lot of projects, and I didn't want to go and rewrite all my code. So I wrote these functions that had the same names and did the same thing, but in the background, they're using hcslim. So the actual guts of hcslim is only maybe 10 lines of code. So I'm going to walk you through those lines of code. And by the end of this presentation, you'll actually have as good of an understanding of this R package as if you wrote it yourself. So this is what an hcslim chart looks like. We're back to that flexible list framework that Highcharts also uses. It pretty much looks exactly like a Highcharts call now, except we are using R. So in R, we need to use lists whenever you have flexible kind of unstructured data formats in R. You use a list. In JavaScript, you would use a JavaScript object. And it's doing exactly what you think it would do. It's just taking that list, it's building out this little script tag, and then it's sending that to your to the browser to be generated into an actual chart. And here's the magic. This is really all there is. So line 94, we're taking that options list that you gave it, and then we're using JSON Lite to flip it to the JavaScript world and turn it into JSON. And then there's a few little tweaks that we have to do to get from JSON to something that will run in Highcharts. And there's not much, there's just some little tweaks. One fun story is when I was using Highcharter, I ran into this issue, and I haven't used Highcharter in a year, so they may have fixed this, but I ran into this issue, and some of you may have as well, where if you only give it one x-axis or one value on the x-axis and say it's Apple, it'll take that value and it'll split it into letters. It'll make it A, P, P, L, E's separated across the x-axis. And I ran into that same issue when I was making hcslim, and the reason that that happens is because when you convert from JSON Lite and there's only one value, it just puts it as a value, but Highcharts actually needs it in a vector. So what I had to do is just write a little script to kind of put those square brackets around it so that it changes from a single value to a vector. And then when Highcharts loops over it with JavaScript, it's looping over that one vector element instead of looping through all the letters of a character. So that's kind of interesting. So I fixed that, and then on line 119, it just combines and glues it all together into one Highcharts call, and then it sends it back as an HTML object. In RShiny, this is what it looks like. So you're going to use your standard UI output, render UI. You don't need any special functions here because it's just creating a script tag. One key difference between hcslim and Highcharts is you can see on line 7 here, we've got this use code Highcharts. So you actually need to tell it what code to grab, and that's just going to create a little script tag that pulls Highcharts from the internet. So hcslim doesn't include Highcharts itself. There's no JavaScript. And the reason I like that is because you can use whatever version of Highcharts that you like. And that's important because Highcharts licenses, you pay for them once and they're lifetime licenses, but they're tied to a version. So you actually only have a license for a specific version. So if Highcharter tomorrow updated to the latest version and your license is for the prior version, then you've got a problem and now you can't update your R package. So that's a big problem. Another thing is so hcslim doesn't make any assumptions about the Highcharter. It's just got to be running in the background just like any other JavaScript package. But you've got this nice little use code function that if you do need to bring in Highcharts, you can just quickly pull it from the web. And then from there, we're doing an output. We're giving it an ID mychart and then sending that same ID to hchtml in order to create that script tag and put it in the right place. And that's really all there is. So welcome to the community of Highcharts developers. So this opens up the entire community and forums and support for Highcharts, and everything from those forms can now be directly translated to the R list format, and then it will just work. It's very cool. It's definitely made my life and the life of my teams a lot easier because now we're not limited to that smaller Highcharter community for support. Another nice thing with this is we're using this flexible list format. So in Highcharter, you kind of need a function for any option. So you could wake up tomorrow and Highcharts could add a little VR chart option, which I think would be very cool. And I wouldn't actually be surprised at all if they added a VR chart option. With hcslim, you could update your JavaScript files and then you could immediately use that feature. You don't need to wait for me to go and update the R package. So that's a big strength of just doing a translation and not really trying to do very much in between. But it's not perfect. There are some things you want to be aware of. So the first one is it's not on CRAN quite yet. I'd like to get it on CRAN eventually, but haven't had the time. Another one is because we're using that list format, hcslim is not going to do any work for you. It's just going to translate it. So you'll have to do some pre-processing to turn your data into that list format before you send it to HTML. So whereas Highcharter would have done some of that work for you, now you have to do it yourself. I think it's worth it for the added flexibility, but that's something that you want to keep in mind if you're deciding which to use. Also, R Markdown. So my solution is only going to work on the web. It's geared for RShiny specifically, so it's not going to work with R Markdown. I did just a couple days ago write a function that lets you view a chart in RStudio. So that's nice. You can use it in RStudio and tweak and try things out, but you won't be able to use it in R Markdown. And that is my talk. So welcome to the Highcharts community, and I'm excited to see what you guys do with this. And one thing that I did want to note is that this is a framework that when you're doing that translation to JavaScript, that doesn't necessarily need to only be done for Highcharts. So if you have other wrappers for JavaScript that you're not happy with, then I definitely recommend just forking or copying my code and then tweaking it to work with some other library. And one other thing I want to mention is that this code is so simple. A lot of times you actually don't need to install the R package. You can just copy and paste the code into a R file within your project and read it like you would any other script. And sometimes that's easier. And that is all I wanted to cover. Thanks for your time, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. That's awesome package and great presentation. We already have a lot of questions, so I will just read them. First one, can you use high maps and high stock with hcslim?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a little argument called chart type. So the way Highcharts works is for maps, you have to use a map chart. There's a different functions within Highcharts. And so there's an argument to let you pick which one you want to use. But again, we're just sending code directly to Highcharts. So whatever you can install in the background, you can use. And I don't use high stock very much, but I use high maps all the time. And it works really well.
Great. Is there a way to use Tibble in hcslim?
Tibble, Tibble?
Yeah.
There is not. hcslim is only going to do Highcharts stuff, and Tibble is a separate thing. And I think Tibble is more useful in. Oh, sorry, Tibble. I'm thinking of.
Yeah, like a data frame, but.
Tibble. Yeah, you're right. So you've got to turn that data into a list. So there is a function called list parse, which will go through every row and turn every row into a little list object. So that makes it a little bit easier. And Highcharter has the same function. But it's not going to directly take your data frame. You'll have to turn it into a vector, if that makes sense. So it's not going to directly take a Tibble. You'll have to tweak it into that list format.
Sure, thank you. Since Highcharts is a commercial charting library, what is the licensing policy for hcslim?
hcslim uses the GPL3, which is enforced because I think JSON-Lite uses the GPL3, so you have to follow that chain. Highcharts itself is free for academic and personal use, but if it's professional use, it's I forget exactly. It's a couple $1,000s for a license, but again, that's a lifetime license, and you can actually pass it between multiple people. So for me, it's pretty rare that I have to buy a new Highcharts license. I just pass the one that we have around. So hopefully that answers the question. So you do need to worry about licensing with Highcharts, and I think it's totally worth it. It's just such a great R package. If you're in a company and you're earning revenue, then you should have that in your budget. But there's no licensing considerations for hcslim.
Thank you. Would it work for an R Markdown HTML file posted on the web, or it won't at all?
It won't at all. So the R Markdown is packaging all of that JavaScript together, and with Highcharter, the JavaScript is packaged within the R package. And I don't know exactly how it works, but I think somehow it jumbles all that together. So I wouldn't expect that to work. Now, it might work if that R Markdown somehow has access to Highcharts in JavaScript running in the background. To be honest, I haven't really tried. So I'd say maybe give it a try, see if it works in your specific use case, but don't be surprised if it doesn't.
Okay, sure. Are all Highcharts modules, like no data loaded, preloaded, or do you have to include them manually?
I always include them manually. I'm not sure if there's an alternative option, but it's always just been most intuitive to me to build the data in a reactive and then just send it on to JavaScript from there.
Sure. Next question. Being able to easily switch between JSON and R lists is an important concept. Can you elaborate on the two JSON variables to control returning a value as opposed to a vector?
Two JSON variables. Are we talking about that little adding the square brackets? Do you think that's what that refers to? I'm not totally sure what the question refers to. You probably don't know either.
Can the author add something? Maybe we can wait for the answer. If that's
I would say there's two main considerations in translating to JavaScript. So there might be, when you do a JSON like to JSON, you have lots of different options on how that translation happens. So there might be an option maybe that I don't know about where you can always enforce that you have a single value coming through as a vector. But the problem is in Highcharts, some of the options you don't want to be a vector. Like the chart type, for example, it says column and it's just a value. It's not in square brackets. It's not a vector. And so, yeah, most of the times when there is a single value, you actually want it to convert to a single value in JavaScript. But the one exception is when you're working with data, and that's expecting a series or a vector. So that's why I had to make that little tweak, but it actually works pretty well. And it's an issue that only comes up if you have one x-axis value, which is pretty rare. And then you can actually fix it in R by just, instead of giving it the data, you put the data inside of the little C brackets and turn it into a vector in R, and then it'll be a vector when you do the translation. So you can actually handle that in advance of the translation as well. Hopefully, and then the other thing is the JavaScript. So when you pass JavaScript through JSON-Lite, it's going to treat it like a character, but you've got to take away those. At the end of a character, you have the quotes, right? So you've got to take those away so that when it goes to the JavaScript world, it knows that it's code. So there's another thing that we have to do where you have to use this mark.js function whenever you're using JavaScript in order to tell it to undo those little quote marks. So those are the two things you have to worry about: the single values and the JavaScript that's in line.
Okay, I'm just checking if we have new questions. I don't see any questions. Yeah.
Maybe while we're waiting, you can see I've got these two Bitly links here that I forgot to talk about. I actually set up a RStudio public workspace where you can go and play around with hcslim. So that's a link there for you if you want to go and use this right now.
Great. And you said it's not on cron yet. When do you plan to publish it on cron?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I've been afraid to run the CMD check to see how many errors and how much work there is for you to get there. But maybe if you add a GitHub issue, that'll make it happen faster. I could probably get it done in about a month.
And do you want others to help you to participate in creating the package?
Yes, please. I'm only one person, so if you have ideas, I'm very open to pull requests, issues, questions. You can find me on LinkedIn or you can go to GitHub. I really enjoy the open source community, and I definitely love to collaborate.
Great. Okay, so I also encourage everyone to participate and help build this package and the whole community. Thanks a lot. This was a great talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.